Oh, it looks like we're having some problems, and it's on. All right, guys. How you doing? It's Jason Sheftel here, and we have a great little show for you. It's time to talk about, again, the war in Ukraine. And this time, we're going to talk about finance. There's a lot of stuff going on in Ukraine. I mean, there's refugees fleeing everywhere. There's an attack on a nuclear plant that could have been another Chernobyl type situation. There's just problems and issues and changes in the whole world and the world infrastructure. It's all happening right now. And there's so many things to talk about. And I'm going to start talking more about what people can do individually to kind of make their way through this, to navigate this difficult time. But right now, we need to talk about something big and broad that's been happening. And it's about finance. And it's about what we thought finance was and what finance is being proven to be as not this pandemic, as this war has progressed. So we need to be real about what we're seeing. What we're seeing from the United States and NATO, which isn't getting into a direct conflict with NATO, because doing that is a way to just have everything escalate to nuclear war. The and a good reason why people should realize the Russian military is being revealed, as I've been saying for months and years now, it is not what it was made out to be. This military is far, far weaker compared to something like the United States than most people had realized. We had no idea the Air Force was as limited as it is. We knew the Navy was basically a joke, but we also just didn't know that there were such systemic problems in the planning, in the operations, in the logistics, in the basic maneuver warfare, in every single component of the Russian military. There are huge problems. And you add in the morale problems, you add in the huge information challenges that Russia faces because it doesn't really tell people exactly what they're doing. There's, a KGB down type information structure where not everyone knows that there isn't this well integrated hierarchical system you see in the United States where there's freedom and all these other levels. It's a real disaster in a lot of ways. And the Russian deterrent, the great deterrent for Russia has always been have a big military. This big military can protect you. It can at least make people fear you so they don't attack you. That's been a huge reason why Russia has a giant military, and it's why Putin rebuilt the military. But now what we're seeing is that this great deterrent is kind of fading away. People are very scared right now. Russia is very threatening. It's doing very extreme damage to Ukraine, but it's also showing its limits, the very, very hard limits on what Russia can actually accomplish in any sort of military action on its own in the world. And you get into the repercussions of this. Few people thought that there would be such a unified front that we're seeing. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But first, we're going to talk about the most brutal dagger that we're seeing be thrown at Russia, really. And that is a financial war. We are really witnessing the first real brutal financial assault that could be qualified or labeled as a war. So Russia's central bank assets, the foreign currency reserves, these were frozen. And so the way this works, for people who aren't aware, is the central banks of various countries, they hold reserves that let them intervene in the markets to support their currency or to basically influence the price and the demand, the supply for it. Very common thing. It was especially got big in the 1990s as everything globalized, as the Asian financial crisis happens. All this was happening. It basically countries around the world just started stocking up their reserves, and this was also a major part of how major exporters, the export industrialized nations of Japan and Germany and basically all the big stories of the 20th century, and China included, they all just piled up these reserves. And it used to be back in the day, there was always reserves, but they were typically gold. But now it's not gold. Gold is like less than 15% of a country's foreign, basically of its reserves. And what it has instead is foreign currency. So we often hear foreign currency reserves, even though it just used to be reserves. Now it's foreign currency reserves because the foreign currency is like 80%-ish of what every central bank holds. So what happened to Russia is that the Western nations decided, hey, those reserves you have parked in France and Germany and the United States and Britain and Japan and all over, they're all seized. You can't access them. You have no control over them. Basically, Russia lost all of the financial firepower it had built up for years in its currency reserves. And that is a huge, huge deal. It means the state can't intervene to help its currency. It can't really show the resolve of the government to support the the financial system, the economic model, really. And what you're seeing in Russia is obviously just brutal hyperinflation, just the complete collapse of the basic structure of how things work in Russia. And right now, Russia can still get money into the country. There is still technically no ban on oil and gas because that's going to cause huge problems, huge production problems around the world in terms of huge production of all sorts of goods, and then also just supply problems for the basic input of everything, right? Transportation, energy, all this stuff. You need energy. Russia's a huge energy supplier. This was another major piece of leverage that Russia thought it had. What we're seeing is that even though this is still there, and Russia can still sell these goods, it could still sell the oil and the gas, the major natural resources and commodities it holds, people aren't buying them anymore. It's almost like tainted goods. And so this is the main way that Russia would get more hard currency into its country, and it could start to keep things afloat. That's fading away. 2/3, 3/4, some percentage, some very high percentage of traders and buyers are just unwilling to take Russian oil and gas, and things are going to cascade in a really bad direction with all this. But we're not going to talk about that right now, but it's really more about this financial war that we're seeing. And it really opened up the floodgates when we saw full-on blocking sanctions, and we saw central bank reserves being frozen. I mean, this is something where the basic structure of the international financial system did not contemplate something like this happening, right? Because think about it. If you're a country, why would you, if you're Russia and you knew that all of your money could just be confiscated the moment you went to war, why on earth were you hoarding this money? Forget that. Hoard gold, hoard diamonds, hoard anything that is real, right? Hold some sort of resource that honestly should have just held oil. Oil is going to be just huge, have massive, underground reservoirs filled with oil, right? That's actually a better thing to hold than foreign currency that can just be, frozen. The database could just be frozen anywhere around the world. It's a huge transformation and we've never really seen anything like this. You go back through our history, you've just never seen it. And this is really, there's other things. Everyone should know and can already see that all around the world, companies we're basically back to kicking Russia out of the system. I've said this in a couple of videos. Russia is being excommunicated. It is being, right, and it should be, right? This is a major war. It is breaking kind of the foundations of what we thought we'd built during the 1990s when the Soviet Union had fallen. Russia was being integrated into the world system. This was not supposed to happen. And then this happened, and now all bets are off. It's crazy, right? You have all the companies that had moved into Russia, all the big American companies, big German companies, big British, French, everyone. They're all leaving. Russian planes are being seized by leasing companies all around the world. Russia is disappearing from the world economy. And I have a video on that, and you guys can check that out. But this is really just remarkable, right? You've never really seen this for any sort of war like this. It's really a crazy thing, and it is a sign of unity, right? Everyone was not expecting this. This is a major, major sign of Western unity, and it's basically dealing a crushing economic blow to Russia. And this is something we need to think about a bit more clearly, though. What we're seeing is definitely Western unity. And we wanted a global world. We wanted a world where everybody was in this together, right? We didn't want a world of different systems and different spheres of influence. Basically, starting in the 1990s, we wanted to bring everyone into the fold. And now that's over. That doesn't work. It does not work for Russia. It is not going to work for China. It is not going to work for a lot of the world. And what we're seeing with unity isn't global unity. Global unity is gone. What we have again is Western unity. And that is tenuous, right? The idea of what it means to be Western, what does Western really mean? Do we embrace this identity? Is it associated with colonialism and imperialism and racism and sexism and all sorts of other isms? What do we do with this? What do we do with this mere Western unity? Some people are very proud of it, very excited about it. I personally think it's not going to last. I think there's deep frictions and fissures within this coalition. I don't think France and Germany and Britain and Italy and Spain and Portugal and Luxembourg and all these places can actually stay unified once the big bad red threat has adjusted. And once perhaps the countries on the eastern periphery of Europe are the ones that are dealing with this problem. And if you're farther west in, say, France, or if you're off the coast and you're Britain, your perspective is a bit different. We saw Britain left the EU and it wanted to do its own thing. So we're not going to see this beautiful re-NATOification of Europe. It isn't going to happen. It's going to be a brief moment of unity, and then it's going to be something different. But we always got to remember that this unity is not global unity. We're very happy. And there is a bit of a global element to it, but it is primarily a Western unity. And that is something we haven't wanted to talk about. That is something that we haven't wanted to really imagine, that maybe we're just going to, the world is going to shift back and it's going to be more of a smaller Western Europe, North Atlantic, America, Anglosphere, Japan, Singapore, South Korea, a much smaller group of countries that are really part of the world. They're really part of civilization, to be more blunt, because what we're seeing in Russia and what we're going to see in the downstream effects in the energy markets of the world, in the agricultural markets, in the industrial production systems, in basically everything, everywhere, is that civilization isn't going to be in as many places as it has been. And that is a hard thing to tell people, is a hard thing to say. It's a really hard thing to accept, but it looks like that's the case. And it's very weird that we are so enamored with this unity that we have, when behind this unity is the destruction and the fragmentation of a broader global vision. And behind this unity is a major economic weapon where finance itself, and international finance in particular, has become a massive cudgel that Western nations can use against countries they don't like, and then have admittedly done very bad things like Russia with this war, but that still countries are countries, and they do things that other countries don't like. Imagine if something like this had happened when the United States went to war in Iraq. I'm not equating the Russian war in Ukraine with the American war in Iraq, but let's think about these for a second. There was a lot of civilian casualties. There was a lot of problems there. There was very dubious reasons why we went in, at least that were communicated to the public early on. It was all a very dubious thing. It was decades. There was a lot of civilian casualties. There was a huge mess afterwards. All of this. I don't need to get into all of it. But this, imagine if on top of that, the whole world had condemned the United States in an even deeper way and started to shut Americans out of whole parts of the world, right? This is a very different response that we're seeing from the United States and from its allies. And what we're seeing happen to Russia is just truly remarkable. And a big reason why is because it is the end of an era. One thing that finance has been doing, particularly since the 1990s, when the globe was really opened up and globalization entered its heyday phase, and the Soviet Union and the Western, all that, the Eastern Bloc, all that fell, and everyone was integrated into this broader system, what we were seeing was the Western financial system was the conduit for all of the capital flows and movements and exchanges that were happening all around the world. So people were traveling in planes and goods were traveling in ships, and then the money, the capital to fund things, to move things, to build things was moving through banks and through wires, or cables, and basically wires, and they were moving, and that was where the actual economic linkages, the deep ones, were appearing everywhere. And the Western financial system was the hub of everything. It was the way that all of this happened. It was the reason that a country like Russia could join the new Russian Federation from the 90s, could appear, it could join the world, it could trade with the rest of the world, it could accumulate reserves, it could balance its currency against other countries, it could supply, and it could enter this whole system. And it could have a role, and it could have a sense of independence because it had the central bank, it had the whole perception of its own ability to direct its economic destiny to some degree. Obviously, it's not a superpower, but it could still do it. Now, things have just changed so much. I mean, the U.S. had already weaponized the international financial system, right? This accelerated under Bush and Obama. It really fired up under Trump, and now it's become a true weapon under Biden. And this is a real shift, and the world financial system is not going to be the same after this. There was already huge challenges in seismic quakes coming for this global system in the first place. Now, well, I mean, and just to be clear, why? I mean, we have demographic shifts, we have industrial shifts, we have consumer market shifts, we have serious production shortages, we have material shortages in different parts of the world, we have major problems in the ability of different labor forces in the world to integrate their young populations, to actually upskill them, to develop the high incomes they would need to be a self-sustaining major sort of economy. All of this was a major challenge, and it was going to be a real challenge for the globalized market your financial product everywhere in the world type system we've had since the 1990s. But now, inflows from the rest of the world into this system, it's just not going to be as easy, as smooth as what we saw before, because everyone was sold a different idea about what the system they were buying into was about. They didn't know that what they thought they were accumulating could just be taken at any moment, that if you do something that the United States and its friends and allies don't agree with, you can just be excommunicated from the entire system. Governments around the world will question what kind of leverage they are giving the US and its allies over them. And obviously, the US has always had this leverage. It created the global system and structured the global capital markets to work like this. This is not a flaw, a fluke, right? Or some sort of unexpected, pleasant byproduct that the US wasn't expecting. This was known, and this was basically designed to be this way. And countries have always known this, and they've been resentful and angry and worried about what might happen forever. I mean, China is the best example. It has been railing and raging and against this US international financial system for a very long time. When it talks about internationalizing the renminbi, it talks about the whole dollar dominance that the US can implement around the world. So the currency that most people want, and when they're storing reserves of any sort, it's all dollars. That gives all sorts of leverage, gives US points of interference and contact and authority over wide swaths of the international financial system. It's always been a problem. But now the true potency of this weapon has really come to light. Of course, I mean, that's the one side of it. But we got to remember that countries only put themselves in this position to be hit with a really large stick like this because there's also a really big carrot nearby, right? The huge problems in terms of the leverage that other nations, major nations, can get over you if you join in and become part of this Western financial system, it's well known, but there are also no better capital markets. In fact, there's really no other major financial markets anywhere. There's no other show in town. You can't go to China. You think you're going to get a better deal. You think China's not going to use your presence in any sort of element of the financial system that it has control over for its own benefit. It's crazy. And that is really the way it looks. And there's not much any country can do. Like if you're a country and you're trying to plug a capital shortage or store the equivalent of your national retained earnings, or you're parking resources you've accumulated for future investment, or whatever it is you're trying to do, there's really only one place to do it. Otherwise, you're stuck with the very real limitations of your own likely corrupt, likely inadequate financial system. You don't really have another option, but that is where things are heading. And we've got to remember that there's really no other show in town, and countries have always known this was going to be a problem, but they didn't want to do things on their own because they knew the chances of things going very poorly were much higher, right? The norm in history when a country starts to flag is not for the IMF to come and save them. It's not for an international coalition to put together a package to try and revive their economy, whatever you want to say about austerity, what other things. There was never really a world where that stuff even happened. And now that whole thing isn't going to work anymore. The whole system is really just being revealed to be something very, very different. In another video, I'll talk about how this will affect China, because China, the way it's propped up its own financial system, was already straining after basically the changes in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a key node in the way China was able to do what it did with its internal finances and how it related to the rest of the world. And that's all going to add in this. It's going to set off a real domino effect, but that's for another episode. But for right now, we've got to know that finance will never be the same. It will never be the same game. And the truth is, this is more what finance has always looked like. Finance right now and finance and economics are being proven to be political tools like any other. And in the coming years, there's going to be no sphere of life immune to the ravages of our very turbulent global politics. Everyone likes to think sometimes that if you're just making money, that and you're doing things and you're in the world of commerce and that's enough and you're away from politics, that is a way to escape it and to sort of do your own thing, be your own person. That's very true in an individual sense. But if you're your own nation, all of the finances, all the wealth, wealth and power really go together and you can't pull them apart. Even if you're a very wealthy person, if you do super well in your commercial activities as a person, as an individual in the United States, anywhere, you become subject to a political gaze and to basically political attention, right? If you're suddenly a billionaire in China, whoa, the government is looking at you. If you're a billionaire in the United States, then you're also getting all sorts of public attention and private attention from all sorts of people, both individuals and actual government actors. It is a basic thing that we all know and we see everywhere, but we've kind of convinced ourselves was different. But it is now time to lose that and to ditch it. Finance is about to be rapidly transformed, and we're going to need a new look at a new understanding of why this is happening, why it is the way it is, and what we were missing when we were embracing this heady, globalized, all the money goes everywhere, everything is impersonal, it's all just about the dollars, it's not about anything deeper. That world has ended. So get ready. And I will be doing more videos like this. So if you enjoyed this, like this, subscribe, throw on notifications. Definitely a time to throw on notifications because there is big news happening. And with that, I will see you next time.